should be judged, and that you should reward your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the earth. Then the temple of God was opened in heaven, and the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple. And there were lightnings, noises, thunderings, an earthquake, and great hail.
Yeah, continue on with chapter 12, please.
Revelation chapter 12, beginning with verse 7.
Verse 7.
And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, "Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time." Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, to her place where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who kept the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ.
Thank you, sir. I warn you ahead of time, all these trees that are blooming have really messed up my allergies over the past several days, and I am very medicated right now. So I may just pass out here in a minute, and if so, Tom, you can just pick up where I leave off. Chapter 11, chapter 12, and chapter 13 tell us why Christians suffer. It gives us a history lesson. It even goes back to close to the beginning of creation and brings us up to date, so to speak. And then when we get to chapter 13, we'll see what's actually taking place during the time period that the book of Revelation is being written. I hope you downloaded the charts from the second lesson we had. On the second lesson, we had a lot of affirmative and rebuttals, and we didn't have any time at all to cover those. There were seven or eight arguments for 95 AD being the date, and along with rebuttals, there were some 13 affirmatives for 68 AD, along with their rebuttals. I need to bring one in tonight for Revelation chapter 11. I'm going to end up rereading chapter 11. I'm sorry, but there's some special emphasis that I need to put on some of the words in chapter 11 based upon this affirmative for 68 AD. Chapter 11, verse 1 and 2, "And there was given to me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given to the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. The claim of the 68 AD being the date in which this book was written, uses these two verses saying, hey, he says to go up and measure the temple, so obviously the temple still existed. And the Gentile court shall they tread, that's future tense. So obviously the book of Revelation was written before the destruction of Jerusalem. I don't really know that you can depend upon the verb tenses in chapter 11 to draw that conclusion. I would like to reread chapter 11 just briefly. Sorry, Tom. I want to put an emphasis on the actual verb tenses we have here. Starting with verse 1, and there was, past tense, given to me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, past tense, and said, rise and measure, present tense, the temple of the altar of God, but the court which is without the temple, leave out. Okay, let's go on down to verse 3. I will give power to my two witnesses, future tense, and they shall prophesy, future tense, 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth and ashes. These are, present tense, the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing, present tense, before God in the earth. Come to think of it, I may not go through the entire chapter. These verb tenses jump all over the place. You have present tense, you have future tense, you have future perfect tense. In verse 7 there, shall have finished. You also have past tense all through this chapter. It turns out that these two olive trees, he's talking about Moses and Elijah. But he says he will give power. He's already given power to his two witnesses. Moses and Elijah occurred in the Old Testament. So you cannot necessarily depend upon the verb tense in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, to come to the conclusion that 68 AD is when this book was written. That's the point I'm trying to make. Sometime when you have time, go through this book, go through chapter 11, and look at all the changes of the verb tenses. Sometimes they're future, sometimes they're past, sometimes they're present, sometimes they're future perfect. So to say, to pick out just two verses and say, oh, two verses out of the book of Revelation, it's 68 AD. That doesn't work. That does not fly at all. Do the verb tenses determine the meaning of Revelation? You cannot depend upon them. Revelation is organized in story format. There's a story that I told my kids when they were little about something that happened to me and my brother whenever we were young. In the middle, even though that happened last century, I still use future tense in that story, and I will use present tense in that story, and I will use past tense in that story, even though it has already happened. So you cannot actually hear me tell that story and tell me when it happened based upon verb tenses. So be careful, especially with chapter 11. I have not actually gone through and studied why there are so many different verb tenses. That'll be a good homework assignment for you. Check out that chapter and see if you can figure out why there are so many verb tenses in that chapter. I do not know why. I haven't studied yet, so I don't know. That's basically that point there. Okay, let's keep going. What does measuring the temple imply? I'll let you answer that. Save me from having to talk a lot. What does measuring the temple mean? It could be. It could be. Based upon the context of the book of Revelation, especially chapter 7, what would measuring the temple part of the temple, and then leaving out the Gentile court imply? Yeah, I agree. Yeah. God knows his people, and he knows, and there is a judgment coming, yes. I agree with that. We're actually going to get into that again in chapter 17. We've covered it already. The earliest that this book could have been written is 69 AD. The temple could have still existed because it could have been written in 69 AD. We don't know for sure. Because we are told with, I'll give you a preview of coming attractions. Eusebius, Irenaeus, Jerome, and who's the other one? There's 4 of them. Their historical writings indicate that it was Domitian. It was indeed Domitian that put John on Patmos. But Domitian's father was reigning as Caesar starting in 69 AD. And we know that Domitian had military power under his father's administration. So it could have very easily been that Domitian did indeed put John on the island of Patmos as early as 69 AD. And it could be that the book of Revelation was indeed written as early as 69 AD. However, is the book of Revelation, is the tribulation the destruction of Jerusalem? We covered that in lesson 3. The book of Revelation gives us 7 characteristics of the tribulation, and all 7 of those characteristics contradict the historical record of the destruction of Jerusalem. They also, all 7 contradict the premillennialistic doctrine of the tribulation, and they were all 7 in harmony with the saints of the first century being persecuted by the Roman Empire. Could the temple have existed when Revelation was written? Yes, absolutely. It could. It could. Barely, but it could have been, yeah. Mr. Eads. Let me bring this microphone back here so everybody can hear you. Especially the people online. I've had people say they want to hear.
Well, the church is also referred to as the temple of God.
Yes, it is. The fact that the court of the Gentiles is mentioned makes you think that it might be the actual temple or a temple from Jerusalem. But yes, that is true.
You brought up a question regarding the contradictory or conflicting tenses within the same sentence or whatever. Could it not be a quote like Joe said, "I will do such and so"?
It could be a quote, but it's not. I don't think not in 11. Check it out. Check it out sometime. Research that. I don't think chapter 11 is actually quotes. They're actually telling a story. They're talking about Moses and Elijah being given. He says, "I will give them power to prophesy." Well, that's already happened. That's really past tense in history. True. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Possibly. That'd be a good thing to research to see exactly when and how each verb tense is used. But these verb tenses all throughout the book of Revelation are just all over the place. It even uses the future tense for things that have happened in the Old Testament. That'd be a good research, and I admit I have not actually taken time to look at why we have so many verb tenses in that chapter. But we've already covered the fact though, that the 7 characteristics of the tribulation from our third lesson are not consistent with the historical record of the destruction of Jerusalem. But could the temple have still existed when Revelation was written? Absolutely. According to the 2nd and 3rd century historians, yes, it could have been. That does not necessitate that the book of Revelation is automatically about the destruction of Jerusalem, though. Could be. One problem you run into with the destruction of Jerusalem, folks, is that they insist it was 68 AD or earlier. According to these historians, it had to have been 69 AD or later. Yeah, Jerusalem could have existed. The temple could have still existed. But to tell John, one question I have about telling John to go measure the temple, though, it's got to be symbolic, because he's not going to transport John all the way to Jerusalem and then back again. You're going to find the same, let's see if I have a slide about this. You have the same thing being said about Ezekiel. I don't know if I have that context here. Ezekiel was told to go measure the temple. When Ezekiel was told to do that, the temple did not exist yet. So there's another example of, well, did the temple exist? Well, we're not really sure. We're not sure one way or the other. Who are the two witnesses? Well, I've already said that. They are given power to devour their enemies. They have the power to shut off rain from heaven. They ascended into heaven. They have the power to turn water to blood. They have the power to smite the earth with plagues. Who's that talking about? There's two of them, Moses and Elijah. In this case, they are probably representing all of God's prophets. I'm going to show you, well, it's in the very next slide here. There's just a few verses talking about how a lot of the Old Testament prophets suffered. They were hated, and in some cases they were murdered. Any more comment about that? Yep.
If the two witnesses were Moses and Elijah, how do you associate this 1,260 days with them, since between the two of them they had well over that amount of time too?
I am glad you asked. And you know what? I'm glad I fixed that slide. It's down at the very bottom of my slide deck. Let's talk about that for a second. Where is it? There you go. In AD 66, Florus, who was a Roman ruler in Judea, sent troops to Jerusalem. They killed 3,600 citizens, and that's what started the Jewish rebellion against Rome, which ultimately caused the destruction of Jerusalem by General Titus. You're going to find in the book of Daniel, possibly in the book of Ezekiel, and for sure in the book of Revelation, anytime you see 3.5, that also, it's usually 3.5 years. It also equates to 1,260 days. It also is equivalent to 42 months. You're going to find in, I'm thinking it's Daniel. Is it Daniel? I think it's Daniel. Ezekiel possibly, and Revelation. Anytime you see these numbers that show up, it's always a time of turmoil. It's always a time of chaos. Sometimes it's a war. But rarely do you ever see these numbers in the book of Daniel, the prophetic book of Daniel, the book of Ezekiel, and the book of Revelation. But what it isn't talking about some type of turmoil occurring. It is a symbolic number. One of the introductions that I used to have for Revelation went into the numerology of Revelation. And I may have to go back into that. But numbers have a specific meaning in the book of Revelation. And these numbers right here are usually, if not always, in Revelation, indicative of some period of time where there's problems occurring.
So one other place where 3.5 shows up several times in Revelation, where it talks about times, and half a time.
Yeah.
Time is one,
Yeah, time, times, and halftime. That's another, yeah. That one's a little bit harder to prove, though. But yeah, I agree. It is. You're right. Time, times, and halftime, 3.5, 1,260 days, 42 months. They're all symbolic. Don't take those literally. I would say they were symbolic and figurative first, unless it could be proven that they were literal. Good question. Does that answer it? Okay, good. That was a good question. I'm glad I just happened to have that slide available. Okay, let me go back and see. Where do we get to? Okay, we're there with the... Clearly, the Old Testament prophets, a lot of them were murdered. That's one of the things that God mentions in chapter 11. He said, I'm tired of trying to preach to these people, and these people just turning around and killing my prophets. Any more comment on that? Let's move on to chapter 12. We've got something interesting coming up in chapter 12. What do we know about Satan? Here are some things we know about Satan. We know he was created like the other angels. We know he lived in heaven. Satan was in God's face about something. And here in a minute, we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail. Angels were obviously given free will choice. Got to mention this. I have heard preachers say that the fact that Satan had free will in heaven to defy God, to sin, means that when we get there, we have the same ability if we want to. I've heard others say, no, we won't. I have not been to heaven yet, so I'm not going to say, yes, we can, no, we can't, but I will say this, and you can make up your own mind. If I have to deal with, in heaven, the same thing that I have to deal with here on earth, then why is it such a wonderful place to go to? If you get there and you have to deal with the same problems you have to deal with here, temptation, for example, sin, the problems of sin, the impacts of sin, even if you're not the one that did the sinning. If I have to walk on eggshells in heaven and I know I'm going to get thrown out the first time I mess up, why would I even bother going? But there are some people, there are some preachers, I have heard them say, Satan was given the choice to sin or not. We have that same choice when we get there. I've heard others say, no, when we get there, we're not going to have to worry about temptation. We're not going to have to worry about sin because nothing sinful is there to tempt us in the first place. So you can you can mull that over in your mind over this next week and see what you come up with. But I thought that was an interesting contrast in doctrines. Satan did not want to leave heaven. The war was between God's angels and Satan's angels. Satan lost and got kicked out. Satan, to me, appears to be one single spirit. Is that what you think too? It just seems like he's one individual that has a lot of followers. That's the implication that I'm getting from chapter 12. And he's called the accuser of our brethren. But the accuser of what? Something strange happens let's get this first. Something strange happens in chapter 12. We'll cover in just a second. Let's look at this word accuser. This word accuser is actually a legal term. It's like a prosecutor who brings charges against someone. It is a complaint in the law which brings charges. It's actually a legal term, accuse and accuser. Let's take a look at this phrase now. This is strange, and this will be something that you feel free to go back and research behind me. Don't take my word for it. I've looked back. In fact, just a while ago, I looked at BibleHub.com one more time just to make sure I was reading this right. This is the last part of verse 10. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Now follow me on this. Based upon that phrase, it looks like Satan accused the brethren before he was cast out of heaven. Are you seeing that in that verse? He accused them, past tense, before God day and night. The accuser is cast out, present tense. The implication is that Satan accused the brethren before he was cast out of heaven. If Satan did accuse the brethren before God day and night, past tense, then what did he accuse them of? Well, I can only think of one thing that Satan would accuse us of, and that would be sin. Is there anything else? Yes, sir.
Hey, your man Job is not as great as he's made out to be. You remove your protection and he will fall. So
Okay.
that Job had not done anything, but it's like this guy over here is weak, right? So it seems like there's some parallels there. We get some insight into.
So Satan accused Job. Okay. Good comment, because I got a question coming right back at you about that, okay? Thank you for mentioning that. If Satan accused the brethren before God day and night, before Satan was kicked out of heaven, then that means Satan was free to roam the earth before he was kicked out of heaven. And that means that he had already tempted Eve. And then after the war, he was kicked out of heaven and now roams the earth only. Where does Job fit into this? Is Job before or after he was kicked out of heaven? I don't have Job up here, but that's actually a good question. That is a very good question, because Job is one of the oldest recorded stories in history, one of the oldest in the Old Testament. So where in the schema of things does Job fall in here? Now, interesting, huh? Okay? Forget everything I've showed you on that slide because it's not right. This is what surprised me when I went. By the way, if you have not used BibleHub.com, do it. You'll spend hours there. It's an incredible site. If you look at the original Greek word of is and accused, the King James Version has the verb tense flipped. Is actually has been. Accused is actually accusing. It's called a present active tense. It means it's happening and it continues to happen. That changes things just a little bit. It looks like the war in heaven against Satan was for unspecified reasons. Now we're not very sure why the war in heaven occurred and why Satan was kicked out of heaven. It was no longer accused, it's accusing, it's ongoing. So was it before or after? Now we're not quite sure. Satan lost the war and was cast out of heaven. Satan is accusing, present active tense, the brethren before God day and night. Was that before or after Eve was tempted? I wish we had a better timeline in chapter 12, but we don't. We can deduce some things, but not very well, really. Don't know what this time frame is. I do know accused, which accused is not past tense, it's present tense, ongoing. There's another homework assignment. Don't take my word for this stuff. You'll research it yourself, okay? And see what you can find. Okay. We are now to the verse that tells us why Christians suffer. We don't have to guess. We don't have to make things up. Chapter 12 tells us right here. Verse 12, therefore rejoice ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down to you having great wrath, because he knows he hath but a short time. That short time is the time that we're living now. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, verse 17, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Take chapter 11, combine it with chapter 12, and what do you come up with? We have Satan killing the prophets. Well, first, Satan is in God's face for something, and he lost. He lost the fight. We have Satan trying to kill the prophets to stop God's plans to reconcile us back to God. He failed. He tries to destroy Israel to stop God's plan. He stopped him a few times, but ultimately he failed. He tried to kill the baby Messiah through Herod wanting to kill all children 2 years and under. He failed. He tempted the Messiah when the Messiah was older to get him to sin. He failed. He killed the Messiah. He crucified him to get rid of him. That didn't work either. Every time Satan tries to do something to get in God's way, he fails. All through the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament, why do Christians suffer? Very simple. We're the only ones left standing. Who else is Satan going to go after? The prophets are done. The Messiah's already come and ascended into heaven. Who's left but us? One of the contrasts that we talked about in the first lesson between the book of Revelation and the book of Genesis is that in Genesis, the earth became temporal and painful. In Revelation, we are there forever and there is no pain. Temporal and painful. Satan is going to wreck our world as much as possible, meaning your life. He's going to cause, now that pain's in the world, he's going to cause as much of this pain to come into your life and wreck your life as much as he possibly can to get you to not follow God. Now, I heard all growing up that, hey, Satan wants you to follow him instead of God. Actually, that's not particularly true. Satan does not want you to become satanic. He doesn't want you to become a member of the satanic church. All Satan wants is for you to not follow God. That's it. He doesn't care who you follow, just as long as it's not God. That's why Christians suffer. We are the last ones standing. This is the last chance Satan has to get back at God. Agree? Disagree? Comments? Is that logical? I've heard of sermons and devos and lectures about why Christians suffer. Right there it is. Right there it is. How do we defeat this accuser? According to Revelation chapter 12, verse 11, we do it through the blood of the Lamb. There's our memory verse. I told you that memory verse was going to pop up over and over again. There's our memory verse. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, the blood of Jesus cleanses us from all sins. There's how you overcome the accuser. Not because you're perfect, but because the blood is. I don't know where I got this from. I wish I could give credit where credit's due. But I read this somewhere. It says, Satan knows your name because you by your sin. God knows your sin because you by your name. That's your memory verse. If you walk in the light as he is in the light, the blood of Jesus cleanses us from all sins. We have about 2 minutes left. Any comments on that? No, he doesn't. Satan does not want Jesus' name mentioned anywhere, or God. That's right. And you know, it's interesting. Satan isn't wanting you to follow him. He just doesn't want you to follow God. Jesus, yeah.
There's many people following God, but which God are you following?
That's true, yeah. I'm talking about the God of the Bible, right. You're right.
There's many people out there that are following a God, or God, their God, or whatever.
Yeah.
Talk about Jesus, and they say, no.
Yep.
He
And
was a man. No, he was not just a man.
yeah.
Isaiah.
And if can bring, since the world has pain in it now, if Satan can bring enough pain in your life to make you turn away from God, then he's won. He won. Satan won. Why do Christians suffer? Right there's the answer. Let's cover this one right quick. The best commentary on the book of Revelation is the Bible itself, because the book of Revelation makes lots of references to other places in the Bible. One place it makes references to is the Old Testament. In verse 15, it talks about the earth opening up and rescuing the woman from the flood that the dragon put out to drown her. You see at least twice in the Old Testament where the earth opens up to accomplish God's will. In the rebellion against Moses and Aaron, the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the rebellion. And the people who were around fled. The rest of the people fled because they didn't want the same thing to happen to them. These Christians who read the book of Revelation would know the Old Testament very well. And when they read in verse 15 that the earth opened up its mouth, they knew exactly what that means. That means that the earth was doing something to help God accomplish his goal. Interesting references all throughout the book of Revelation to the Old Testament. Did I answer your question about the temple sufficiently? Okay. Was a temple there? I don't know. Could it have been? Yes, it could have been. And we'll cover that timeline in a little bit more detail when we get to chapter 17, because we're going to be talking about 7 kings plus 1, and that'll give us a little bit more history. Okay, thank you very much. That is all.